Okay, so in this chapter, we're going to look at photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is a little bit different than what we're going to talk about in a future chapter on how our cells are able to produce and use energy. Our cells, or most mammalian cells and most animal cells, will actually undergo a process called cellular respiration, where we take nutrients and break them down for energy. However, our friends, the plants, go about this a different way. They will undergo a process called photosynthesis. And what photosynthesis does is it's converting light energy into a chemical form of energy. So the organisms that are able to undergo photosynthesis are called autotrophs. And autotrophs are going to be your producers, and they will carry out the process of photosynthesis. We are called heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are consumers, and we end up consuming the products that are produced by the autotrophs. So cyanobacteria carry out photosynthesis mainly in water. So there are some bacteria that can undergo this process. Eukaryotes such as algae and plants carry out photosynthesis in the water and on land. And it is not known that any archaea are going to carry out photosynthesis at all. And here's a little diagram that kind of shows you the different types of organisms that do undergo photosynthesis here. Now, life definitely does depend on photosynthesis. This is half of the whole equation. So we as consumers require oxygen to survive, and we require nutrients. Plants, for example, in this example, will require CO2, which is a waste product of us, and they will also produce nutrients such as sugars. So this is a nice little circle between that goes back between the producers and the consumers. Now, every ecosystem on Earth is based on photosynthesis. Consumers and decomposers obtain their energy from molecules that are produced during the process of photosynthesis. And here we can see that we're taking in light energy, undergoing photosynthesis, producing oxygen and sugar, which will then get consumed by the heterotrophs, such as an animal or us, which will undergo cellular respiration and produce water and CO2, which is required for photosynthesis. Now, sunlight is the main power for photosynthesis. Photosynthetic organisms need just a few simple ingredients to make their own molecules of sugar: sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. Carbon dioxide and water are consumed with light energy, and glucose and oxygen will be produced through a photosynthetic pathway, such as, again, photosynthesis will produce oxygen and sugar. Now, the sun emits energy in waves, and light waves are a very small part of the whole spectrum that reaches the Earth's surface here. Shorter wavelengths have higher energy than longer wavelengths. And here we can see where visible light actually comes into play here on the whole spectrum of wavelengths. And only some wavelengths are visible to us. We perceive these wavelengths as colors. Plants and other photosynthesizers capture photons of visible light, and then they use that visible light in order to convert it into an energy form. So pigments are molecules that capture energy from light, and there are several photosynthetic pigments that are found, for example, in plants. They're called chlorophylls or carotenoids, and these pigments are found in plants are specialized in absorbing energy from the different wavelengths of light. So chlorophyll A is the main photosynthetic pigment in plants. Each type of pigment absorbs energy from some wavelengths of light and reflects other wavelengths. Accessory pigments are less abundant in plants than are the chlorophylls, but extend the range of wavelengths that can be absorbed. And here we can look at a table of some pigments. So chlorophyll A, the colors that this will pick up is between blue and green, and the organisms that will use this are plants, algae, and cyanobacteria. Chlorophyll B, this will pick up your yellow to green colors, and plants and green algae will use this. And then the carotenoids or carotenes and xanthophylls, this will pick up your red, orange, yellow colors, and plants, algae, and bacteria will use this. So plant pigments that do not absorb green light only absorb light that is useful for photosynthesis. Green light is reflected, which is why we perceive leaves to be green. So they're not actually absorbing that green light, and because it's being reflected off, that's the light that we're actually seeing versus all the other light, which is being absorbed by these various chlorophylls. Photosynthesis does occur in the leaves. Gas exchange occurs at the leaf pores called stomata. And what's happening is CO2 will go in because that's going to be a precursor for photosynthesis. And what will come out through the stomata is going to be oxygen and water. Now, the organelle that is responsible for photosynthesis is called a chloroplast. And plant cells will have these chloroplasts, which are located within the plant cells themselves. Now, chloroplasts are, evolutionarily speaking, were bacterial cells at one point or prokaryotic cells at one point that got engulfed by, for example, in this case, plant cells, as a mechanism for producing energy for the plants. Each chloroplast will contain several stacks of membranes called thylakoids, and a stack of thylakoids is called a granum. And these granums are going to be located inside the chloroplast. Another thing I want to mention is that the chloroplast is a double membrane structure as well. The pigment molecules in the thylakoid membranes will capture the sunlight. So within these actual thylakoids is where you'll actually see the pigments, which will capture the sunlight that's coming through. The light capture occurs in photosystems. A photosystem is a large protein structure in the thylakoid membrane. A photosystem consists of antenna, pigments, and reaction center that contains chlorophyll. So the chloroplast will lead to the thylakoid. The thylakoid consists of a photosystem, and the photosystem consists of an antenna, pigments, and a reaction center that contains chlorophyll. The thylakoid membrane is present. The reaction center of the chlorophyll leads to the chemical structure of chlorophyll with the hydrophobic tail, as shown in this image. Now, photosynthesis is a series of chemical reactions. Overall, the reactants are light, water, and carbon dioxide. And overall, the products are oxygen and sugar. There are two reactions, such as light reactions and carbon reactions. In the light reaction, water and oxygen are involved, in which NADPH is transformed into NAD+. This is an electron carrier that will pick up energy in the form of electrons and protons and transfer it from one form to the next. As we talked about in the last lecture, energy can only be transferred from one form to the next. In the carbon reaction, carbon dioxide and sugar are involved, in which ATP will then be transformed into ADP. And here, photosynthesis occurs in two stages. Again, the light reactions, where light energy is captured and converted to chemical energy, and the carbon reactions, where energy is used to produce sugar. The light reactions begin photosynthesis. The light reactions occur in the thylakoids and require water and light. ATP and NADPH are produced to carry the stored energy. Oxygen gas is formed as a byproduct. This illustration shows an electron micrograph of a plant cell. Micrograph of plant leads to the enlarged view of a chloroplast. There are two reactions such as the light reactions and the carbon reactions. In the light reaction, water and oxygen are involved, in which NADPH is transformed to NAD+. In the carbon reaction, carbon dioxide and sugar are involved, in which ATP is transformed into ADP. The process of light reaction is highlighted here. So how do the light reactions work? The light-dependent reactions or light reactions occur in the thylakoids, membranes of the chloroplast, and use light energy to synthesize ATP and NADPH. The products of the light reactions are ATP from photophosphorylation and NADPH from photoreduction. Both are used as energy source for the light-independent reactions. In the first stage, the light reactions, light energy is absorbed from the sun and converted to chemical energy, which is stored temporarily in the form of ATP and NADPH. Light absorbed by chlorophyll or other pigments is used to drive the transfer of electrons and hydrogen from water to an acceptor called NAD+, reducing it to NADPH by adding a pair of electrons and a single proton, a hydrogen nucleus. The water is split in the process, producing the waste product of oxygen. So the pigments will transfer energy to the electrons. Light strikes the first photosystem, PS2. Chlorophyll absorbs the light energy and transfers it to the electrons, which come from water molecules. Electrons move to an electron transport chain. The light-dependent reactions, again, are going to occur in the thylakoid membranes of the chloroplast and use light energy to synthesize the ATP. The PS2 is what produces the ATP. So the electrons from the PS2 move down an electron transport chain, as shown here in the second box. Hydrogen is pumped into the thylakoid. Hydrogen leaves through ATP synthase. ATP synthase is a large enzyme that will synthesize ATP through a chemiosmotic phosphorylation. The PS1 in the third box here will produce NADPH. Electrons arrive at the second photosystem, which is PS1. When light hits PS1, chlorophyll transfers light energy to the electrons. The electrons move to a second electron transport chain, and electrons reduce NADPH, which is an electron carrier, to NADPH. So essentially what's happening here is the NAD+, P+, is picking up the electrons that are now being produced, because NAD+ is going to be an electron carrier. So ATP and NADPH will power the carbon reactions. And ATP and NADPH produced during the light reactions carry the stored chemical energy, because now that's what you produce with ATP and NADPH, which was derived from sunlight. In the carbon reactions, this energy is used to break up molecules of carbon dioxide and build molecules of sugar from it. Now, let's just take a little moment here. Some weed killers actually block the light reactions. Some chemicals such as weed killers, DCMU and paraquat, will block the light reactions by interfering with the flow of electrons. DCMU or diuron and paraquat block the light reactions by interfering with the flow of electrons in photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. In photosystem 1, water leads to half the oxygen plus 2 hydrogens. And in photosystem 1, NADP plus is converted to NADPH. So the carbon reactions are now the process. Once you've done the light reactions, now you're going to go through the carbon reactions, which will complete photosynthesis. The carbon reactions will occur in the stroma. The chloroplast will use ATP and NADPH, which was produced by the light reactions. Carbon reactions will use carbon dioxide and it will produce sugars. So in the chloroplast, just to kind of recap here a little bit, there are two reactions, such as light reactions and carbon reactions. It was the light reactions where we produce the energy, and now it's the carbon reactions where we use the carbon dioxide to produce sugars in which ATP is transformed to ADP. And in this case here, you can see the light. Okay. So the carbon reactions will actually require Rubisco. These are the carbon reactions, which are also referred to as the Calvin cycle. The first reaction in the cycle is catalyzed by an enzyme called Rubisco, which makes the first carbon fixation possible. And you can see that right up here. The cycle begins from 1. Carbon fixation. Carbon dioxide is added to Rubisco, creating an unstable molecule. Is added to RUBP, creating an unstable molecule. The second stage is pGal synthesis. The unstable intermediate splits to form pGal. The pGal molecules are combined to form glucose, which is used to form starch, sucrose, and other organic molecules. Regeneration of RUBP is regenerated by rearranging the remaining molecules. During carbon fixation, Rubisco enzyme adds the carbon dioxide onto a molecule of RUBP, and an unstable 6-carbon organic molecule are produced. During pGal synthesis, small organic molecules are formed. Therefore, one pGal leaves the cycle and multiple pGals combine to form molecules of glucose. In the regeneration of RUBP, it consists of 5 carbon sugar molecules, and some of the pGal are used to reform RUBP and start a new cycle. ATP and NADPH provide the chemical energy needed to keep the cycle running. ATP and NADPH are built up during the light-dependent reactions. So again, here, if you kind of follow the cycle around here, the first step is carbon fixation. Carbon dioxide is added to RUBP, creating an unstable molecule. Then in the pGal synthesis, the unstable intermediate splits to form pGal. And then in the third stage, pGal molecules are combined to form glucose, which is then used to form starches, sucrose, and other organic molecules or sugars. And some of that pGal will then go for the regeneration of RUBP. And RUBP is regenerated by rearranging the remaining molecules, which then will take the whole cycle over again. So let's look at this again step by step with the highlighted areas. Carbon fixation, Rubisco enzyme adds CO2 onto a molecule of RUBP. An unstable 6-carbon organic molecule is produced. With pGal synthesis, small organic molecules are formed. ATP and NADPH from the light reactions are cashed in. Their energy is used when PGA is converted to pGal. One pGal leaves the cycle. Multiple pGals combine to form molecules of glucose. And then finally, the regeneration of RUBP. RUBP is a 5-carbon sugar molecule. Some of the pGal is used to reform the RUBP. This starts the cycle anew. And then the carbon reactions produce carbohydrates. Plants use glucose for energy and to build sucrose or large polysaccharides. So one pGal leaves the cycle, and therefore multiple pGals combine to form these glucose molecules. So plants will use different carbon fixation pathways. C3 plants and C4 plants and CAM plants each do photosynthesis, using different pathways for fixing carbon. Each has its own advantages and disadvantages depending on the environment the plant is in. We have been studying C3 photosynthesis, which is used by most plant species, such as the sycamore tree. C3 plants do well in cool, moist weather. C4 plants and CAM plants are adapted for high, dry weather. So it really depends on the location of the plants. So in this first part here, the first pathway, during the daytime, a Calvin cycle occurs in the mesophyll cell. Carbon dioxide leads to RUBP, which leads to PGA to produce sugar. In the second part, during the daytime, the Calvin cycle occurs in a bundle sheath. Carbon dioxide from the mesophyll cells leads to oxoacetate, which leads to carbon dioxide to produce sugar. The third part shows during the day and nighttime, carbon dioxide leads to a 4-carbon molecule that leads to carbon dioxide producing sugar. C3 plants do it all at once. Notice the different leaf anatomy and the Calvin cycle position. All reactions take place in the mesophyll cells. In hot, dry weather, the stomata close and conserve water. Photorespiration occurs due to oxygen buildup inside the leaf, decreasing photosynthesis. And here is where, in the C3 plants, where the Calvin cycle will be occurring. C4 plants, on the other hand, will divide the labor between the cells. The light reactions will occur in the mesophyll of the cells. The carbon reactions are catalyzed by Robusco, which will occur in the bundle sheath cells. Photorespiration does not reduce the efficiency of photosynthesis. And then the CAM plants will actually divide the labor temporarily. About 1% of plants are CAM plants, like this cactus that live in the desert conditions. All reactions for photosynthesis occur in the mesophyll cells. Carbon reactions occur only at night in cooler, moister air. Photorespiration does not reduce the efficiency of photosynthesis. So investigating life, let's take a little step back here before we wrap up. Salamander embryos benefit twice. Embryos with a jelly coat receive oxygen from the algae. Researchers use radioactive labels to show that the embryos also receive more sugars from the algae when grown in the light rather than in the dark. So if you look here in part B, an embryo supplies carbon dioxide to the algae, and then as a result, the algae will provide sugars and oxygen to the embryo. In part C, this is a graph that shows the approximate net radioactive difference by disintegrations per minute as follows. The embryo alone is 1,000. The whole egg, including the embryo, is 11,000. And that's it for this chapter.